This is the Hera H6. It is a bolt-action, side-loading, magazine-fed rifle. Now, this kind of rifle really hasn't been done in many decades. There is, of course, the FG-42, which is the most iconic side-loading rifle of all time, but other than that, there haven't been any big-name productions. There have been some clones of it. There's been a 9mm version of the FG-42, but they all draw inspiration from the FG-42. This is its own thing. It has its own design language. It has its own feature set, and of course, it's a bolt action. It's not semi-auto, so it's very different from what you will find basically anywhere else. I don't normally make this kind of video anymore. This is not a review. So I want to preface this. This is not a review. This is a first impressions / a first shots. But so much happened on the first range trip with this rifle that I literally have to make a first shots. Otherwise, the review is going to be exorbitantly long and not viewer friendly in any way. So, quickly, I will go over some of the features of the rifle, some of the on-the-box stuff. It is a folding stock. You simply press in this button, fold it over. There's no locking mechanism here, which kind of sucks, but really this is for transportation, so I don't really fault this too much. And of course, snaps into place. You have QD points on both sides of the stock, and of course on both sides of the handguard. The stock does come with these little not cheek pieces, but these pieces go on either side of this hole, so if you're worried about things getting caught inside the hole in the stock, you can put these in here, and you're given a bit of storage room for your Skittles. Now, this cheek riser does come off, but this cheek riser is the perfect height for a red dot on a riser, or sorry, not on a riser. It's the perfect height for a red dot that is a flat flush mount. Specifically like this. It is also a very good height for an LPVO, like a lower LPVO mount. And of course, traditional scope rings. Just make sure whatever scope you have isn't, or the rings that you have, or anything isn't too high. You want a lower profile. This is kind of the form factor of a traditional rifle. Now, interestingly, what you also have is a grip panel. Now, all you have to do is remove this screw, and this little grip panel comes off. Now, Hera doesn't advertise any of this. Like, there's nothing on their website for replacing the grip panel. But theoretically, it would be super easy to have modular grip panels, so you could have, maybe if you really like the whole Hogue overmold type things, theoretically one could be made for this. You could 3D print this little piece and have it fit your fingers. There's a lot you could do with this, but seemingly Hera doesn't have any plans for it right now. It's nothing on their website or on sale from anything I found. So there's that. Now, it is a bolt action, and it is a very smooth bolt. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that because it is a side-loading magazine, the bolt face is slightly different. So all you have to do to release the bolt, it's just like a normal bolt action, press that in and pull out, but can be a bit finicky. Now, you might notice there's a bit of a design flaw in this system in that it blocks, so you have to push it to the side and out or fold the stock. Bit of an oversight, but it is what it is. This is your bolt. It's a pretty standard bolt, except for the fact that the lugs are to the side. It's a little strange. It's not very different, obviously, but it's having to pick up rounds from the side instead of the bottom. Now, we'll get way more into picking up rounds in a second, but this is just the features part. So other than that, I believe it is a normal bolt. The bolt handle is very nice. I believe it can be taken off by just the screw, but honestly, the bolt handle is nice enough that I would never consider replacing it. I wouldn't even consider putting hockey tape over it. Now putting it back in, again, kind of have to finick with it, but it goes in pretty easily. The controls are very simple. Back for safe, forward for fire. Now if you notice, it is perfectly ergonomic. This is one of the best bolt action safeties I've seen on something like this. Obviously, it's not ambi. Nothing on this gun is ambi. Forget it if you're left-handed. Buy something else. You can stop watching now. But if you are ambidextrous or you're right-handed, perfect location for the safety. The bolt will operate whether the safety is on or off, which is nice. And the trigger. Oh man, the trigger is something special. This trigger is actually not made by Hera. It's made by a different company. I'll put it up on screen because I don't remember right now, and I also don't think I can pronounce it, but it's on screen. Now, this trigger is absolutely phenomenal. It is advertised as 2.2 pounds, and I absolutely believe it. It is maybe, it's the nicest trigger I've ever felt, to be honest. It's the nicest trigger I've ever felt. And I can verify the 2-pound claim. I just have one of these cheaper testers, and there you go, 2 pounds, actually slightly under. So I would say 2.2 pounds is a conservative estimate because it really is that good. Now for the rest of it, you have a standard AR handguard. I believe this is the handguard that Hera makes for their ARs. It's a really nice handguard. It's nice and lightweight, really good lockup. M-lock slots at the bottom, left and right. I just have some pick rail and some M-lock covers over here. Pick rail in the front for a cheap bipod. Otherwise, perfectly lined. Also worth mentioning, this isn't the case for a lot of bolt-action rifles that have AR handguards. It is perfectly lined up. They did a really good job of making sure that it all fits together well. Now the barrel, I'll put the specs up of the barrel on screen. I believe it's a 1-in-9 twist, but the specs on screen will correct me if I'm wrong. And this is an 18.5-inch barrel on this one, but I believe there is also an SBR that is coming. Now, they wouldn't be classified as SBRs in Canada, but I think they might be in the US. They'd be classified as pistols in the US. Whatever, it's complicated. And it's threaded 1/28. Now they advertise this as suppressor ready, which is fantastic for anyone who is not in Canada. But I do want to make one note on this. I believe they put a tiny bit of thread lock on these threads, or maybe they just ultra tightened my muzzle device, and it was a pain in the ass to get off. If you're going to advertise it as suppressor ready, you should not be putting any thread lock or super tightening the muzzle device that's on here by default. Now, it does come with an A2 birdcage, but I am not a fan of the birdcage flash hiders. I'd rather go with a linear comp or a muzzle brake or a fake suppressor or whatever. In the shooting footage, you'll see I was just using this TNA fake barrel sleeve. It's not a suppressor, it's just a barrel sleeve. And I will be using a muzzle brake whenever I get to the accuracy portion of the testing that I will do later. Now, magazines. This is where everything fell apart. So, I just want to demonstrate. These are not live rounds. They are just empty. They're casings. And the reason why I have these, I will show you in a second, but Hera advertises this as having a last round hold open, and it kind of does. This is their proprietary magazine. It's proprietary. It's an AR-15 magazine that they stamped Hera H6 onto, and they have an interesting lockup system. Just press this through, and then it kind of hinges open. It's an interesting system. But more importantly, if you take a look at the follower, it's much more of a squared follower, which means that when you put this in the rifle and you pull back, you will encounter a last round hold open. Now, it is kind of last round hold open because if you press hard enough, it's just going to depress the follower. So if you were like super in the heat of the moment of like some kind of competition or something, then you wouldn't notice. But if you're chilling at the range and you're not working the bolt super hard, then yeah, you'll notice last round hold open. And before I forget, this does use standard AR mag releases. I believe it does anyway, because I tried to put an ambi mag release in this thing so that I could more easily release the magazine just by pulling like this. It didn't fit. So I think there's the type of mag release, AR mag release, that will work in this is case by case basis. This one is just a plain old mil-spec mag release, and it works. It's not the most effective, or efficient, I should say, as you saw, because if I'm trying to reload the magazine, my thumb has to go around and pull back. If you want to imagine it yourself, imagine reaching around from the back of an AR-15 magazine and pulling. It's very odd. It doesn't really make sense. It would have been much nicer if they had a thumb release magazine here, like a proprietary one, or, here's a crazy thought, they make their own ambi mag release. This is an expensive enough rifle, it should just come standard with an ambi mag release. That's a huge design flaw. Now, on to the point of these empty casings. As you can see, or as I showed earlier with the geometry of their standard mag versus this is a cross mag, a 10-round pistol mag in Canada, they are very different. So, the last round hold open on this will not work. I don't even have to be pressing very hard. It's just not going to work. And that's because the geometry of the follower is more sloped, and so the bolt is just sliding right over it. But that is not where the problems end. The problem that I had with this rifle, and you will see I have multiple clips of this, is that the feeding was catastrophically bad. Now, I very, very, very rarely will completely put a company on blast because I think they should be able to fix it. Especially if it's a smaller company. But this gun, this is the simplest thing. It is a bolt-action, manual-action firearm. And it can't fucking feed from magazines. This was an incredibly disappointing range trip that I did, because the trigger and the weight of the thing felt so good, and for it to just not work, it was literally inoperable because of how often it failed to feed. Now, let's put this mag in here. I will try my best to get this on camera here, but if I can't, then I might try and use some of the range footage. Now, let's see. It is barely making contact with the round. It is such a tiny amount, and if it's positioned in the wrong way, it won't pick it up at all. Now, it did there. Fantastic. Doesn't always happen. I just wanted to put a quick voiceover for what you're seeing here. The problem that's happening here is that the round is not being picked up by the bolt. And so what's happening is either it's scraping the round, the side of the round, and pushing it against the receiver, and then getting stuck. Or, towards the end, you're seeing it completely skip over the round and me having to adjust the magazine so that it can pick up the tiniest bit of the round.
First one. white on the 69. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. That's
This is an example of what was happening at the range constantly. And it's not a matter of me going fast or me going slow or, normal speed. It was constantly happening on these mags. And if a mag doesn't work, all right, that sucks. That really sucks. But it's not the end of the world, right? Some guns are just picky on mags, and bolt actions being picky on mags is not unheard of in any way whatsoever. What really made it frustrating was the fact that it didn't work with any of the mags that we had that day. Now, we had SOCOM mags. That the exact same thing happened, was not feeding. Alright, fine, SOCOM mags. But this was the mag it came with. And it did not work with the mag it came with. That is an unforgivable sin in any firearm. If it doesn't work with the mag that you supply, especially if it's one that's marked as compatible with that gun specifically. It was not working, and it was extraordinarily frustrating because of the hype that I had for this gun and the expectations I had. So, I come back from the range, and I'm like, okay, I need to figure this out. I'm going to need to contact warranty if I can't. So, I come back, and I notice that there are 3 screws in here, so 1, 2, 3. The screws are not tightened all the way in. The magazine well felt really sturdy, but I guess it was enough to keep it into the thing, but not enough such that it was feeding the rounds properly. So I tightened all the screws, and magically, when I started testing the rounds going into the chamber, or, well, they're not really going to the chamber because they're not proper, but what I was testing for was whether or not the bolt would pick up the rounds. And when I started doing that with this, they started picking them up. No problem. They had absolutely no issues with rounds being picked up. And I think it could potentially be solved, but again, it still was not working with these cross mags. So, more testing is required, as I will do, of course, whenever I can get out to the range next. And this time, I will also bring a PMag, which I didn't have. I forgot. Well, I didn't have one. My friend was supposed to bring one, didn't. So I have my own PMag now, which I know I should have probably had one before, but now I do. So I will test the PMags, and I did the exact same test with the rounds in here, the blank rounds and the feeding, and it seemed to pick it up just fine. So hopefully it will work, but again, that issue of literally unable to function, completely unable to function, is unacceptable out of the box, especially for a gun that is $1,600. Now, unrelated to my experience with this gun specifically right now, when I posted a couple of the things on Reddit, because it's such a new gun, people are interested in it, there were quite a few comments of, why would anyone want this, or what do you expect? It's a weird gun. And look, whether or not it's a weird gun, quite frankly, doesn't matter. If you're paying money for a product, doesn't matter what the product is, you expect it to work. Especially if it's more expensive, right? Sometimes you can give a pass to some cheap thing that's made in China that, you paid $2 for, okay, whatever. But when it costs $1,600 Canadian MSRP, you expect it to work. 100% you expect it to work, especially with the build quality of the whole thing otherwise. You expect it to work. And so it just not working is not, well, it was a weird gun. That's not an acceptable stance to have with this, in my opinion. And why does this thing exist? Well, it's entirely personal preference, right? You, like any gun, you can buy some cheap surplus, Remington 700, change it to 223, or you can buy a Ruger American for like 500 US, 700 Canadian, and it technically is the same thing. It's a bolt action 223 that can take AR mags, or at least some of the Ruger ranches can. And why would you ever buy this over a Ruger American? Well, it's the same question that was had with the CZ Trail. The Trail was a much lighter weight and a much more compact rifle, and it was made for the trail, right? This one is slightly different. This is not one that I would say is for the trail. Now, the pistol version, I guess, or short-barreled rifle, whatever, that version could maybe be for the trail, but again, you're hunting, like if you're hunting or using it as self-defense, there are better options available for it, or for that purpose. So this thing's category, just like the CZ Trail, is rather niche. It is a cool-looking gun that can be great at the range if it works, hypothetically, and it would be a decent hunting rifle for a small game. Nothing above small game. If you need to take something that's slightly bigger and you might need more than 1 223 shot, if you missed, then you shouldn't be using a bolt action to begin with. But for like small game, totally fine. In fact, it's actually remarkably lightweight that it would be an excellent small game hunting rifle. An excellent one. Or, for some people, if you own a ranch and you wanted something that's a little fancier, then you could use this as a wildlife or livestock defense weapon. Now, that's the case for like hunting and stuff, but for range use, there are a few reasons you might want this. Number one is if you're in a place that doesn't have cucked mags, where things are pinned to 5 or we're stuck with 10-round pistol mags, then having the ability to go prone or get right down on a rifle with just a bipod in a comfortable position without having to get around a 30-round or 20-round magazine is actually an important thing. Now, on a bipod, as you can see, like if you're using this like here, which is not a crazy high distance, this PMAG is a lot higher. So you would have to raise your bipod up quite a bit higher, potentially giving yourself more strain and therefore making your shot a little bit more difficult for yourself. So there is actually an advantage to having it to the side. Of course, with prone shooting, that's very important, being able to lie as flat as you can. And for magazine changes, you won't have to lift your rifle and therefore removing your line of sight from your target without, when you're removing a magazine. You just keep your eye on target, push in, push out, doesn't matter. You can easily do it. Now, obviously, if you're using smaller rounds like this, it doesn't really matter too much, which is why it doesn't have much of a market like that in Canada. The other thing that they advertise is that because the flat nature of the bottom here, you can get a very nice hand rest area to keep balance of the rifle. And you can also do I have no idea what the technique is called. I tried it briefly in one of the failed magazine feeding videos where, you put your arm out like this and the rifle is sitting like this for a really steady position, and that was actually quite comfortable. All of these things that I'm bringing up are not insurmountable problems on traditional rifles. And if this thing cannot be fixed, like if I go out and test it and this mag well just is not working and it's not feeding properly, then it doesn't matter about any of the other benefits you get. So I will do more testing, and I really, really hope that it works. I really do, because personally I love the look of this rifle. I think this rifle is so cool. It is exactly in the same vein as the Space Cowboy lever guns, where no, they don't need to look like that, but it's damn cool that they do. And it's a really cool looking gun, and I really want it to work, and the trigger feels great, but if it can't feed, then it's just not a good rifle. So more testing to come. Hopefully what I did fixes it, and I can find some magazines that actually work. But until then, that is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.